And the Danish government is clamping down on the creation and distribution of AI generated deepfakes by changing copyright law to ensure that everybody has the right to their own body, facial features, and voice. The Danish government said on Thursday it would strengthen protection against digital imitations of people's identities with what it believes to be the first law of its kind in Europe. Having secured broad cross-party agreement, the Department of Culture plans to submit a proposal to amend the current law for consultation before the summer recess and then submit the amendment in the fall. It defines a deepfake as a very realistic digital representation of a person, including their appearance and voice. I'm now joined by Murray Simser, founder of Citizn, to discuss Denmark's new copyright law. Murray, thank you for the time today.
My pleasure.
Now, Denmark's proposal reframes the right to one's voice and facial features as a form of intellectual property. Do you see this as a fundamental shift in how we define self-ownership in the digital age?
Well, I think so. If you look, history is always instructive when it comes to these things. How did we prove identity in the Middle Ages with wax stamps and special seals and all the rest of it? Why not use the identity of our face as something like that? So I think Denmark's doing the right thing. They're not going after controlling features. They're not going after controlling harms. They're going after the fundamental piece of intellectual property without which you can't do any of those things.
And from your perspective, is this kind of legal protection necessary in today's AI-driven world?
I absolutely think it is because the harms that come from digital distribution at scale, that is, I can put out anything I want, and within 30 seconds, millions of people can have seen this, regardless of the redress that an individual could get, their reputation may be forever sullied and harmed. And so I think law must catch up with that reality. It's a little bit about thinking about, a little bit like thinking about crime and then turning around and saying, well, you get hurt, but the law only applies 2 days later.
And are there worries that there could be loopholes in this law? I know it's still new, but is there any way that there could be ways to work around it?
Oh, there are lots of ways to work around it. First of all, Denmark is one country in a choir of countries. There are 200 countries in the world. Most digital fakes that are actively looking to harm somebody right now are coming from outside of what I call legally stable countries. And so if somebody in a country other than Denmark, it doesn't quite matter which one, were to say, put up an image of me that was in some way making me look bad, what recourse would I have if I'm in Canada? This would be an awfully complex and expensive exercise to go after somebody legally. This makes it a little easier. I suspect other countries will follow suit.
And if legislation, as you just mentioned, you think that countries will follow suit, but do you think that it will be the same kind of law that other countries will follow, or do you think it'll be tampered a little bit depending on the country?
Well, let's look at our travel connectors for electronics. Every country has a different plug. And I think that if you look at the history of why every country has a different plug and not the same plug, the answer is exactly what you've just suggested. Different countries, different realities, different expectations, different cultures, different ethics, different morals, different solutions.
Mhm. And if legislation like Denmark's becomes more widespread, do you anticipate a need for technical infrastructure like global watermarking standards or biometric verification protocols to help enforce these protections at scale?
Yeah, I do. If, as I said, the example I gave at the beginning of this show was how did we do it in the Middle Ages? Well, the Pope had a stamp and a specific thing. We're all going to have the digital equivalents of this. And I think the direction that we're going in is if it's not verified content, it must be assumed to be fake. In other words, the future is ignore everything unless Murray's stamp's on it or unless your stamp is on it. That's the only way to truly separate the trash from reality, and it's inevitable.
And do you think that current public understanding of AI generated media is mature enough to actually support legislation like this? Or is there a danger that laws will outpace digital literacy and create a false sense of security?
Oh, inevitably, this will create a false sense of security. But I just like in startups, legislation has to start somewhere. That legislation may or may not be best practice, and this is why multiple countries doing it all at once is quite helpful because they're all trying to figure out what the right tension is between not hobbling the digital creative economy in which there's lots of replication, as we both know. If you just watch Reels or TikToks, everybody's creating replication of everybody. We don't want to forestall or destroy that economic engine, but at the same time, I think that we're going to have to deal with these harms. And although it may be early, I think that what you're going to find is that we will test these out and laws will be modified as a function of the best practices globally.
And what are ways to deal with this growth in AI? I mean, we've mentioned laying a law down, but is there anything else that can happen or that you would recommend that should be put in place to, I guess, slow AI down a little bit?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I agree with slowing things down. Okay, and I'll just my bias is towards sort of open economics, so I'll
Mhm.
say that up front. I'm more of a capitalist than I am a government control type.
Mhm.
And the reason I am that is also the answer to your question. Whenever we try to limit people's use of something, we also reduce the number of things that are tried.
Right.
And so in the non-trying, we lose out both good and bad. And I would suggest to you that trying is better than not trying. Now, having said that, the right approach is to lay the blame at the altar of harm. Okay, so if somebody harms me, it doesn't really matter if they use AI or a butter knife, it's a harm. And it can be actioned. And I think that's where the legislation should stay right now, because we don't yet, as you pointed out, understand fully what the technology stack's going to look like, how it's going to evolve, or even what's coming.
So, with this legislation being enough, do you not feel that there needs to be a larger international framework for this to really be effective?
Well, I thought so until, say, January this year when the multilateral system collapsed around the world. So I would almost argue that the better way forward is bilateral relationships between what I'll call the very wealthy and powerful and influential countries. Broadly speaking, a good chunk of Asia, a good chunk of Europe, and a good chunk of North America, and a variety of OECD countries. They're already going to do this, and there are already talks underway between those countries to take off together, as it were, so that you can control the quote unquote global tech giants that everybody's so worried about these days. It's inevitable that they get together. A global company requires a global response. If Microsoft just has to go to another country to do it, they will.
And what are the biggest risks that people face when their identity is used in a deep fake without their consent?
Well, the answer is everything, which is why I say harm has to be sort of the basis of whatever legislation there is today. If you were engaged, for instance, and somebody made a video of a sexual nature of your spouse, you would probably be seriously damaged by seeing whether or not it was true. That's just an example of something that could destroy a marriage. That's a tiny little insignificant thing. What about a CEO who's just about to go public? Raised millions of dollars from other people's money, and all of a sudden a video that says he's a fraudster or she's a fraudster comes out. These things have real harms, and they will harm people. And I think this is where we need to focus our efforts so we protect people as this new technology develops.
And what are the first steps or several steps that people should be taking if their identity is stolen in a deep fake situation?
Yeah, an ounce of prevention is the short answer. Once your identity is compromised, it's extremely long and difficult process to sort of get that all cleaned up and tidied about. You can get most of it done relatively quickly these days, but the tail end of the damage, meaning will a bank give you a loan? Well, it looks like your ID was compromised. The answer is they probably won't. And so the answer is if they are compromised, immediately contact a lawyer, immediately get some assistance with this, but for God's sakes, change every password that you own to start with and lock down every system that you've got.
Well, Marie, thank you so much for the time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.